Would you roll your eyes at a millionaire without even knowing it? Claire did, and not just any millionaire, Shaquille O'Neal. She treated him like a nobody, ignored him, gave him cold food, and dismissed his kindness until she realized who he was. By then, it was too late. The cameras were rolling, the internet was watching, and Shaq, he was about to teach her a lesson she'd never forget. Hey, real quick, before we get into this wild story, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where are you watching from? The sharp ding of the restaurant doorbell echoed through the quiet diner, but Claire barely acknowledged it. Her tired eyes flickered up from her phone screen for half a second before rolling back down. Not another customer, not this late. She let out an exaggerated sigh, slumping against the counter. The clock above the kitchen door read 10:45 p.m., just 15 more minutes until she could close up and finally go home. The restaurant was almost empty now. A couple sat in the corner, finishing their coffee, and a lone businessman near the window was staring at his laptop. Other than that, the place was dead silent, just how Claire liked it at the end of a shift. She wasn't in the mood for another table, but now some guy had just walked in, ruining her peace. Great. The man was tall, very tall. He wore a loose hoodie, jeans, and sneakers, just a regular customer. His large frame made him stand out, but not in a way Claire found impressive. If anything, she saw another late-night customer who'd probably take forever to order and barely tip. Without looking directly at him, she reached for a menu, grabbed one off the counter, and tossed it onto the nearest table. Sit wherever, she muttered, already going back to her phone. Shaq paused for a moment, glancing at her before walking over to the table where the menu had landed. He was used to being recognized, but Claire didn't even glance at him properly. Just a quick, dismissive look before going back to scrolling. He chuckled to himself. This is new. Sliding into the chair, he casually flipped open the menu. The restaurant had decent food, classic American diner-style options. He wasn't in a hurry, but he did expect some basic customer service. Claire, however, didn't move from her spot. She stayed behind the counter, tapping away on her phone, smacking her gum loudly. A couple of minutes passed. Shaq looked up and raised a hand slightly, signaling for service. Claire saw it from the corner of her eye but didn't budge. Instead, she sighed dramatically, set her phone down with an attitude, and strolled over as if she was being forced. Stopping at the edge of the table, she didn't even greet him. No, welcome? No, what can I get for you? Nothing. Instead, she crossed her arms and stared at him like he was wasting her time. You ready to order or what? She muttered. Shaq leaned back slightly, studying her. Something about her attitude was off. This wasn't just laziness. It was personal, and he was about to find out why. Leads smoothly into Section 2. Now Claire's rude attitude begins to escalate, making Shaq and the audience curious about her behavior. Shaq flipped through the menu, his massive hands nearly engulfing the laminated pages. The diner had the usual selection: burgers, fries, and milkshakes. Nothing fancy, but enough to fill a late-night craving. He glanced toward the counter, expecting at least some acknowledgement from the waitress. Instead, Claire remained glued to her phone, tapping away, eyes barely blinking at the screen. Shaq wasn't one to demand attention, but something about her complete indifference felt off. After waiting a full 2 minutes, he casually raised a hand, signaling for service. Claire rolled her eyes so hard her head tilted slightly, as if serving him was a personal inconvenience. She pushed off the counter with a dramatic sigh and sauntered over at an almost annoyingly slow pace. The sound of her gum popping filled the silence. Stopping just short of his table, she didn't greet him, didn't ask what he wanted, didn't even look at him. Instead, she stared at a spot on the table as if avoiding direct eye contact made him disappear. Yeah, she muttered, her voice flat. Shaq studied her for a moment, unsure if he'd done something to offend her. He wasn't expecting special treatment. He liked being treated like everyone else. But this was straight-up disrespect. He closed the menu and placed it down slowly. Y'all always treat customers like this? Claire let out a small, almost mocking snort. Like what? She asked, still refusing to meet his eyes. Shaq raised an eyebrow. Like they're a problem instead of a paying customer. Claire finally glanced up at him, expression unreadable. Look, you want something or not? Kitchen closes in 10. Shaq exhaled through his nose, keeping his composure. He'd dealt with worse attitudes on the court. But this wasn't a game. This was customer service. "All right," he said smoothly. "I'll take a double cheeseburger, fries, and a chocolate shake." Claire snatched the menu off the table with zero urgency, scribbled something onto her notepad, then spun on her heel. She was halfway to the kitchen when she muttered just loud enough for him to hear, "Could have figured that." Shaq leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin. Something about Claire's attitude wasn't just about having a bad night, and he was about to find out why. Shaq sat back in his chair, arms crossed, watching Claire disappear into the kitchen. Her attitude had been straight up icy. No greeting, no effort, just bare minimum service with an attitude. But not even 2 minutes later, Claire walked back out, and suddenly she wasn't the same person. The front door chimed as another customer walked in, a middle-aged man in a tailored navy suit, polished leather shoes, and a gold wristwatch that caught the low diner lights. Claire snapped to attention. Her phone, tossed onto the counter, her slouched posture, straightened, her face, lit up with the biggest, most charming smile Shaq had seen all night. "Oh, welcome, sir," she practically chirped, walking over with a bounce in her step. Shaq's eyebrows lifted. Now this was interesting. She handed the businessman a menu before he even asked. "Right this way. I'll get you a great table." Her voice had completely changed. She sounded warm, inviting, friendly. She even laughed at something the man said, tucking her hair behind her ear like they were old friends. Shaq wasn't the only one who noticed. A younger waiter across the room hesitated as he wiped down a table, throwing Shaq a glance. The look said everything. "Yeah, you see it too?" Shaq tapped his fingers against the table, watching Claire work like a five-star waitress for the businessman. She listed the daily specials. She offered him their best wine pairing. She leaned in slightly, pretending to be interested in whatever he was saying. For Shaq, she could barely be bothered to take his order. But for this guy, she was giving a whole Broadway performance. Shaq smirked. "So that's how it is, huh?" After seating the businessman, Claire walked back toward the kitchen, where she had no choice but to pass Shaq's table. He was still watching, and she knew it. For a brief second, her eyes flicked to him. Then, the warmth disappeared. She rolled her eyes, her whole body slumping back into her, "Ugh, I hate this job" posture. She disappeared behind the counter for a few moments, then came back out holding a plate. Shaq's plate. She didn't smile, didn't ask, "Need anything else?" Didn't even make eye contact. Instead, she dropped the plate onto the table with a dull thud. Not set it, not placed it, dropped it. The silverware rattled, a few fries tumbling off the plate. "Enjoy," she muttered, spinning on her heel before he could respond. Shaq stared down at his food, not touching it. He wasn't mad. But now he was really paying attention. And Claire, she had no idea who she had just messed with. The moment the food touched his tongue, Shaq's expression didn't change, but his patience thinned. The fries were soggy, the burger barely warm, and the cheese not even melted. He slowly chewed, thinking. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe the kitchen was already shutting down for the night. But deep down, he already knew the truth. This wasn't about the food. This was about her attitude. And now, he was about to test just how bad it could get. Shaq wiped his mouth with a napkin, then casually raised a hand. Claire was back at the counter, scrolling through her phone. She didn't look up, didn't acknowledge him, didn't even pretend to care. After a few seconds, Shaq spoke, his deep voice calm but firm. "Hey, this is kind of cold. Mind warming it up?" The words cut through the air like a record scratch. Claire's fingers paused over her screen. She let out a dramatic sigh before turning toward him, looking like he had just asked her to run a marathon. Then she laughed, a short, dismissive snort. "It's not that cold." She popped her gum. "Just eat it." Her tone was flat. No apology, no concern, just straight-up disrespect. A couple sitting a few tables away shifted uncomfortably. The young woman in a red dress leaned toward her boyfriend. "Did she really just say that?" she whispered. Even the businessman, the one who got five-star treatment, stole a glance at Shaq's table. One of the other waiters, a nervous-looking kid no older than 18, froze mid-step, gripping a tray of drinks. Shaq noticed every single reaction. But Claire, She just rolled her eyes and turned back to her phone. Shaq set his fork down on the plate, deliberately. The clink of metal against ceramic sounded louder than it should have. Then he leaned back in his chair, folding his massive arms over his chest. "You sure you want to handle it this way?" His voice was low, even, controlled. But there was something about it, something weighty, that made the other tables go completely silent. For the first time, Claire hesitated. She glanced up from her phone, chewing her gum slower now. Something had shifted. Claire sucked her teeth, trying to shake off the unease creeping up her spine. "Look," she muttered, shrugging. "If you don't like it, don't eat it. Not my problem." Shaq let out a slow, measured breath, tapping his fingers against the table. He wasn't mad. But now he was done letting it slide. A second waiter, a young Latina woman with her hair in a tight bun, stepped forward cautiously. "Claire," she said under her breath, "maybe just—" Claire cut her off with a glare. "Mind your business, Sarah." Sarah held up her hands and backed away, shaking her head. She already knew. This wasn't going to end well. Shaq exhaled slowly, then leaned forward, resting his massive elbows on the table. His voice was steady, even softer than before. "I'll ask you one last time." Claire crossed her arms. She wasn't backing down. Shaq tilted his head, watching her closely. "You sure?" he said, pausing deliberately. "You want to handle it this way?" A tense silence stretched between them. A few customers were now recording. And Claire, she still had no idea how bad she just messed up, but she was about to find out, real fast. Claire barely looked at Shaq as she snatched the check off the table, flicking it open without a word. She didn't offer a polite thank you, didn't bother asking if he needed anything else, didn't even pretend to care. With a loud slap, she dropped the bill onto the table, barely missing his drink. "Here, pay whenever," she muttered, already turning away. But before she could take a step, Shaq chuckled, low, deep, amused. It made her pause. Claire turned back just in time to see Shaq pull out his wallet. Not a card, not a single bill, but a thick wad of cash. Several customers nearby stopped mid-bite as he peeled off a few crisp $100 bills, counting them out slowly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, $500. The green bills rested neatly under the check. Shaq leaned back, arms folded, watching her expectantly. Claire glanced at the money, unimpressed. She scoffed, grabbed the bills without hesitation, and shoved them into her apron pocket like it was spare change. "Whatever," she muttered under her breath, spinning on her heel. The young waiter, Sarah, standing a few feet away, gasped audibly. "Claire," she whispered, eyes wide. "Do you even know who that is?" Claire barely looked up as she wiped her hands on her apron. "Some dude who left a tip," she said lazily. Sarah exchanged a stunned look with the older waiter, Jake, who had been watching from the bar. Jake chuckled, shaking his head. "No, sweetheart, that's Shaquille O'Neal." Claire froze. For the first time that night, a flicker of doubt crossed her face. Her eyes darted back to the table. Shaq was calmly sipping his drink, watching the entire interaction unfold with pure amusement. Claire swallowed. She turned back to Sarah, voice lower now. "Wait, what?" A low buzz filled the restaurant as customers whispered. At a nearby table, the well-dressed businessman leaned toward his wife. "She just dismissed Shaq like he was a nobody," he murmured, shaking his head. The young couple recording from across the room suppressed their laughter. "Oh, she messed up bad." Their phone camera zoomed in on Shaq's face. He was still smiling. She turned back to Shaq, her throat suddenly dry. The name Shaquille O'Neal finally registered in her brain. The deep voice, the massive frame, the confidence. The man she had been treating like garbage all night was a living legend. A Hall of Famer, a billionaire, a cultural icon. And she had just snatched money from his hands like he was some broke college kid. Her stomach sank. Shaq took another sip of his drink, unbothered. Then he set the glass down deliberately and smiled. "What's wrong? Thought I was just some dude?" His voice wasn't mocking. It wasn't angry. It was worse. It was calm. And everyone was watching. Claire forced a laugh, but it came out weak. "Oh, no, I just—" She waved a hand like it was no big deal. "I just wasn't really paying attention." She swallowed hard. I, I mean, I love basketball. Shaq raised an eyebrow. Oh, yeah? He leaned forward, elbows resting on the table. Who do I play for? The question hit her like a brick. She froze. Her brain scrambled for an answer, but nothing came. Shaq hasn't played in years, idiot, she screamed internally. Shaq smirked. Yeah, thought so. Just then, a ding went off from Claire's phone. Then another, and another. Her fingers shook as she pulled it out. Notifications flooded her screen. The young couple had already uploaded the video. Her rude attitude, the $500 tip, her clueless reaction. And now, thousands of people were watching. Waitress fails. Sure, Shaq did her dirty was already trending. Claire stared at her phone in horror. Shaq pushed his chair back and stood, towering over her. Lesson time, he said. Let's see if you're ready to learn. Claire swallowed hard. She had a feeling she wasn't ready at all. The businessman at the next table leaned over, his voice low but incredulous. Did she just roll her eyes at Shaq? His wife blinked, turning her head slightly as she whispered back, There's no way she knows who he is, right? But at this point, it didn't matter, because someone else did. The young couple seated across the room had already been discreetly filming the entire interaction. From Claire's dismissive attitude to Shaq dropping a $500 tip like it was pocket change, they had it all on video. The boyfriend, wearing a hoodie with earbuds hanging from his neck, tapped furiously on his phone. You getting this? The girl nodded, biting her lip to keep from laughing. Oh, it's going live in 3, 2, 1. And just like that, a 15-second clip with the caption, Waitress treats Shaq you like a nobody. Shaq, a big mistake, hit the internet. Within minutes, the first comments flooded in. No way, is that really Shaq? She treated a whole NBA legend like he's broke. Karma is coming for her. As Shaq calmly watched Claire fumble through her awkward apology, the video spread like wildfire. TikTok, Twitter, Instagram. By the time Claire had shoved the $500 tip into her apron, her name had already been unknowingly thrust into a digital spotlight. At a nearby table, a teenager excitedly refreshed her feed and gasped when the clip popped up with 100,000 views and counting. She nudged her dad. Look, that's Shaq. He's here right now. The whispers grew louder as more people began pulling out their phones, eager to catch the aftermath. But Claire? She still had no idea. Behind the counter, Claire leaned against the register, fiddling with her phone and sighing. Ugh, she muttered to herself. How long till I'm off shift? She scrolled absent-mindedly through Instagram, not even noticing the dozens of new notifications pinging her phone. Ding, ding, ding. Her brow furrowed. What the? She opened her notifications and blinked in confusion. Dozens of comments on her most recent photo. She tapped on one and felt her stomach drop. Girl, you just messed with Shaq. Good luck. Claire froze. Shaq? Her pulse quickened as she scrolled down, heart racing with every new comment. Lamau, she really didn't recognize him? When you treat Shaq like he's a random dude, you rip her career. It's already at 300,000 views. She's done. 300,000 views? Claire's hands started to shake. She glanced up at Shaq, who was casually chatting with another waiter, totally unfazed. It hit her like a punch to the gut. She hadn't just been rude to some tall guy in a hoodie. She had just dismissed one of the most famous athletes on the planet, and now the whole world knew it. Claire swallowed hard, her face pale as she scrolled back up to the video. 380,000 views. 400,000 views. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Meanwhile, Shaq's name was trending across social media. Influencers were already resharing the video with captions like, Another lesson from Shaq. Stay humble, people. How do you not recognize a 7-foot legend? Shaq's face says it all. Even a local news station tweeted, Breaking. Viral video shows Shaquille O'Neal teaching a life lesson after receiving poor service at a restaurant. The comment section? Brutal. She rolled her eyes at Shaq. I can't. She better apologize fast. The internet is undefeated. Ding, ding, ding. Claire's phone buzzed wildly in her hand, the notifications becoming almost unbearable. She glanced at the latest comment. She's about to go viral for all the wrong reasons. Her heart pounded. She looked over at Shaq again, who was now leaning back in his chair, arms crossed, watching her with a calm, knowing smile. He tilted his head slightly as if to say, "You starting to get it now?" Claire swallowed hard. And just as she was about to say something, the restaurant manager stormed out of the back room, his face red with fury. The swinging doors to the kitchen slam open, and a sharp voice cuts through the low hum of the restaurant. "Claire, in my office, now." Every head in the restaurant snaps toward the back, including Claire's. She flinches, eyes wide. She's never heard her boss sound like that before. The restaurant manager, Greg Harris, marches forward, his face flushed with frustration. He's a stocky man in his late 40s, dressed in a neatly pressed dress shirt that now clings slightly to his sweat-covered forehead. His eyes dart between the scene in front of him. Shaq calmly sitting at the table, the other customers watching in stunned silence, and Claire standing frozen behind the counter, gripping her phone like a lifeline. Greg snatches the check from the table. His eyes widen. $500, he mutters under his breath, blinking. He looks at Claire, then at Shaq, and then back at Claire. "You're telling me you got a $500 tip from Shaquille O'Neal, and you still gave him attitude?" Claire swallows hard. She doesn't answer. Greg's voice sharpens. "I said, my office. Now." Claire takes a hesitant step forward, her face burning red. But, I didn't know it was him," she stammers, her voice barely above a whisper. Greg pinches the bridge of his nose. "That's not the point." Shaq watches the whole thing unfold, arms crossed, completely relaxed. He hasn't said a word yet, just observing. Other customers are murmuring now, phones still recording. A well-dressed businessman shakes his head. "Unbelievable." A woman near the bar whispers to her friend, "She's getting what she deserves." Claire, now panicked, looks at Shaq. "Sir, I—" But before she can finish, Greg cuts her off. "Do you treat all your customers like this, or just the ones you don't think are important?" Claire clenches her jaw. She has no defense. Greg inhales sharply, rubbing his temple. He turns toward Shaq, his expression shifting from frustration to full-blown damage control mode. "Mr. O'Neal, I am so sorry," he says, voice suddenly smooth, almost desperate. "I promise this is not how we run things here." Shaq finally speaks. His voice is calm. "Really?" he says, raising an eyebrow. "Because from where I'm sitting, looks like this happens all the time." Greg's face goes pale. He knows this is a PR nightmare waiting to happen. The internet is already on fire with this, and if Shaq decides to say one bad thing about this restaurant, they're done. Claire, now sweating, stammers, I wasn't trying to be rude. I just—" Shaq tilts his head, cutting her off with a single glance. "You just what?" She's silent. Greg exhales, his patience at zero. "Claire, take off your apron." Claire's eyes widen. "Wait, are you—" "Take it off!" Slowly, her shaking hands fumble with the knot behind her back. Greg snatches the apron from her hands. He's done. Greg turns to Shaq. "Mr. O'Neal, what can we do to fix this?" Shaq leans back in his chair, rubbing his chin. A smirk tugs at the corner of his lips. Everyone in the restaurant leans in, and then Shaq chuckles. "Don't fire her." Silence. Greg blinks. "Excuse me?" "I got a better idea," Shaq says, folding his arms. Claire stares at him, confused but relieved for the first time all night. Shaq leans forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Tell me, Claire," he says, his deep voice steady. "You ever done community service before?" The restaurant falls silent, everyone waiting for the final verdict. Greg, the manager, is standing there with Claire's apron still balled up in his fists. Claire looks humiliated but stubborn, her arms crossed tight over her chest. And then Shaq does something no one expects. He waves a hand. "Nah, don't fire her." Gasps ripple through the restaurant. Claire's head snaps up in disbelief. Greg's brows knit together. "Sir, with all due respect," Shaq leans forward, his deep voice calm but firm. "I got a better idea." Shaq rests his massive hands on the table and looks directly at Claire. "You ever worked with homeless people before?" Claire blinks. No." Shaq nods like he already knew the answer. Ever served food at a shelter? Volunteered for folks who don't have enough to eat? Claire shifts uncomfortably. No, Shaq tilts his head. Then how about you do that first, before you go treating customers like they're beneath you? Another wave of whispers sweeps through the restaurant. Claire's face turns bright red. She scoffs, trying to act unbothered. I don't need a lesson. Shaq just raises an eyebrow. You sure? And then he reaches into his pocket and pulls out another $500. The crisp bills flutter onto the table. A total of $1,000 now sits in front of her. The air is thick with tension. Claire's fingers twitch slightly, like she's fighting the urge to snatch the money. Her pride is at war with her greed. Shaq leans back in his chair. Here's the deal. He taps the stack of cash. Take this money, but in return, you spend a week serving people who can't afford a $500 meal, let alone a $500 tip. Silence. The other employees are staring. Customers have their phones recording. Even Greg looks stunned. Claire swallows hard. And if I say no, Shaq shrugs, then keep doing what you're doing, but you'll never get respect acting like this. Her jaw tightens. She's trapped. Claire's eyes dart from Shaq to the money, to the crowd, to her own reflection in the restaurant window. For the first time all night, she actually looks at herself. The question isn't whether she'll take the money. The real question is, can she change? Claire's hands tremble slightly as she clutches the notepad she doesn't need. For the first time all night, she's nervous. The entire restaurant is watching. Shaq leans back in his chair, his expression calm. But those deep eyes, they see everything. Claire slowly walks back to the table, awkwardly shifting her weight from foot to foot. It feels like each step toward him is heavier than the last. She clears her throat, but her voice still comes out small. Look, I was wrong. I judged you. A heavy silence follows. Shaq nods, watching her closely. And what did you learn? Claire inhales deeply. Her entire life, she's never had to say it out loud. But now, she has no choice. Claire glances around the restaurant, seeing dozens of eyes on her. Customers, employees, even Greg, her manager, with his arms crossed, waiting. She licks her lips nervously and forces herself to meet Shaq's gaze. That you should treat everyone with the same respect, she says finally. Her voice is barely above a whisper, but the weight of the words feels enormous. Shaq tilts his head slightly, processing her response. Even when they don't look important? He asks. Claire nods, her face burning. Yeah. Shaq studies her a moment longer, then cracks a small smile. Now you got it. The tension in the restaurant seems to ease slightly. The air, once thick with discomfort, begins to feel lighter. A few of the other employees exchange glances. Some of them actually seem impressed. One of the customers sitting at the bar, a woman who had been filming earlier, leans toward her friend. Damn, he actually got through to her. Even Greg looks slightly surprised. Claire takes a deep breath. She should feel relieved, right? But instead, she feels exposed. Like for the first time, she's actually seeing herself clearly. Shaq gestures toward the half-eaten plate of food in front of him. Claire frowns. You, want me to heat that up for you? Shaq chuckles. Nah, I'm good. He leans forward, resting his forearms on the table. But I do want to ask you something. Claire tenses slightly. Okay. Shaq taps the tabletop. Tomorrow you come into that shelter? Claire hesitates. She could just say yes to make herself look good, or she could really mean it. For once, she doesn't want to take the easy way out. She nods. Yeah, I'll be there. Shaq grins. All right then, let's see if you're really about it. Claire exhales, shoulders dropping slightly. She doesn't know why, but for the first time tonight, she actually feels like she made the right choice. The moment the video goes online, it spreads like wildfire. Within minutes, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok are flooded with clips of the encounter. The video is grainy, shot from across the restaurant, but the audio is crystal clear. Claire's snarky attitude, Shaq's calm patience. The moment she realizes who she just disrespected. And then the lesson. One tweet in particular explodes. Shaq just taught this rude waitress a lesson in respect and left her a $500 tip to prove his point. Class asked. Within an hour, It has 100,000 likes. By the next morning, millions. Comments flood in across all platforms. Shaq stays teaching life lessons. She really had the nerve to roll her eyes at Shaquille O'Neal? He could have embarrassed her. Instead, he educated her. That's legendary. The internet loves the story. Some people roast Claire. Others praise Shaq's patience and wisdom. A few even admit they've had a Claire moment before. But what happens next? No one sees coming. The small, quiet restaurant that barely had customers the night before. Now, it's packed. People aren't just coming for the food. They want to see the place where Shaq taught a life lesson. A couple walks in, eyes scanning the place. Dude, this is it. The table was right there. Another customer takes a selfie near the register. If Shaq liked the food here, I gotta try it. The restaurant's Yelp reviews skyrocket overnight. Came for the viral moment, stayed for the great food. Claire's customer service? 100 times better now. If Shaq says this place is cool, it's cool. And Claire? She's still there, but something's changed. The Claire from the night before? Gone. Now she's greeting customers warmly, making real eye contact, and actually smiling. A customer notices and jokes, "So, you treating all of us like celebrities now?" Claire laughs, genuinely this time. "Nah," she says, shaking her head. "Just treating people right. Should have done it sooner." No one recognizes her more than Greg, the manager. One night, one lesson, and his most stubborn employee finally got it. Shaq stays quiet about the incident for a while, but when the buzz refuses to die down, he finally posts one simple message. Kindness is free, but disrespect? That can be expensive. The tweet blows up instantly. This is why Shaq is a legend off the court too. A lesson and a $500 tip? Man, I want to be like Shaq when I grow up. Somebody put this on a billboard. And just like that, the story isn't just about a rude waitress and a patient customer anymore. It's about how one moment, one lesson, can change everything. Claire checks her phone. For the first time, she doesn't feel nervous about the notifications. Instead, she just smiles. Tomorrow, she's showing up to work different, and this time for all the right reasons.